Joining us now is Lori Matsukawa. Of course, many folks know Lori from her long career as a reporter and anchor at King 5. She retired in June of 2019 after 36 years with King. Lori, Happy New Year, and how's retirement?
Happy New Year, Enrique. Happy New Year, Matt. Retirement is awesome. I really enjoy having the freedom to do what I want when I want and keep in touch with a lot of different folks that I didn't really have time to get in touch with before. It's been awesome.
Well, a little bit of breaking news here about a project you're working on. It's a memoir, Lori Matsukawa's memoir. Tell us about that.
I have always to be a writer since my earliest days as a kid, and now I have the time to actually write. I could write a memoir because it dawned on me that I worked in the business during a time of change and transition. Also, there's a lot of history that has happened that may be unfamiliar to the new generation of journalists and storytellers. So I wanted to put something down for them. A lot of this motivated by my recent conversations with young folks, and they kind of take it for granted that they have they can have a job in the tele news industry. They have a job in storytelling on any platform. They take it for granted that are being, hired for their talent alone, without thinking about the fact that being a person of color might affect the trajectory of their careers. So I want to give them just the history so they appreciate how far we've come as society and getting folks of color on TV screens and on different platforms so far.
And how far we need to go, too. I mean,
I believe so. I think if anything, 2020 has taught us that there's systemic racism everywhere, and we all have to do our part to kind of shine a light on it.
yeah. Matt?
So, Lori, what was your evolution into becoming a news anchor? I mean, how did you start? I know you were Miss Teen America. Did that launch your career?
It sure did. I was just an average kid growing up in Hawaii. I wanted to become a piano teacher. It was my original idea of what I wanted to do. And so I was looking around for scholarship money. We were pretty poor. Both my parents were public school teachers, so we didn't make a whole lot of money. So when a friend of mine said, "Hey, there's this contest, Miss Teenage America, and the winner gets a $10,000 scholarship," I was like, "Wow, that's great. Yeah, sign me up." I had never done a pageant before, or never done this kind of competition before. But my friend said, "You know what? It does not have a bathing suit competition, so you might have a chance. You might have a chance." So I said, "Okay." It had a current events test, interview, and a talent portion. So I got the title of Miss Teenage Honolulu. Our local sponsor was a department store and the local Dr. Pepper bottler in Honolulu. And they sent me to the national pageant in Fort Worth, Texas. And
Wow.
Ken Berry, the actor from F Troop, he was our MC. He sang, he danced, he interviewed us. It was all on CBS television. It was a terrific experience. And I, won the contest, shock of shocks. This was the first time Hawaii had ever entered such, the contest, and first time that they'd ever had a Miss Teenage America of color. And while I was, traveling the nation and to countries around the world, I thought, wow, this is amazing. Everywhere I go, I'm interviewed by journalists. I'm interviewed by print or television journalists. I said, this is a pretty good job. People get paid to talk to people. I can do that. I'd like to do that.
Little
So
did you know.
so I forgot. I said, forget the piano major. I think I'm going to become a communication major.
I got to ask you, what was your performance?
Oh, my talent. I did a Maori poi ball dance. Now, for those who don't know, poi balls are like little tennis balls at the end of a long string and you hold the ends of the string and spin them like propellers on a plane. And you dance with these poi balls. It's a dance of the Maori people of New Zealand. So it was unique, to say the least.
They weren't on fire at the time, though.
They weren't on fire. They weren't
Okay.
on fire.
Oh, wow. That'd have been. Now, did you have to do any other dancing? Did you have to dance with Ken Berry or in an opening routine?
Yes. Oh, yeah. There's the opening routine where everybody comes out and dances and we sing and we introduce ourselves. You know, everybody gets their, Lori Matsukawa, Miss Teenage Honolulu, that kind of thing. And to this day, I keep in touch with Miss Teenage Seattle, Karen Rains, was in the
Wow.
same pageant. You know the Rains family. They're very big and popular here locally. And to this day, Karen and I communicate. We're Facebook friends too.
So how did your journey then go from Miss Teenage to the main anchor at King TV? What was that journey for you like?
It really helped to have an idea of what I wanted to do once I got out of Stanford. So while I was there, I wrote for the Stanford Daily. I had a little show. I would come back summers and be an intern at the Honolulu Advertiser, called then, and basically polish up my journalism chops so that by the time I was going to be just a print reporter because Stanford didn't have a broadcast program. But when I was interning in Honolulu, the managing editor came up to me one day and said, "Hey, have you ever thought of becoming a TV journalist? They're hiring." Okay, it says my internet connection is unstable. I'm sorry.
You're okay.
Okay. One day, my managing editor came up to me and said, "Hey, have you ever thought of being a television journalist? They're hiring women these days." I said, "No." He said, "You ought to think about it." So when I went back to Stanford that year, I got a television internship at KPIX in San Francisco, took the train up the
KPIX.
peninsula. Yep. Took the train up the peninsula, worked at KPIX, ran into a woman from Seattle named Wendy Toda.
Oh, yes.
She had just started working there. And I said, "Oh, Wendy, can I job shadow you?" She goes, "Yeah, sure." So I just followed her around on those days that I could and put together a tape and started applying for work as soon as I graduated.
Was Wendy already an anchor then, or was she still a reporter?
She was still a reporter. And so I sent out 100 applications all across the country for both print and TV jobs. I only got 2 positive responses. One was for a position at the LA Times for a business reporter slot. And the second was for an audition at KRCR, a tiny station in Redding, California. And if you've been to Redding, it's like a really tiny town. In fact, I had to check the Greyhound schedule to make sure I could take a Greyhound bus there. And they offered me a position there. So here I am standing in the Greyhound station in Redding, California, trying to decide Redding, LA Times, Redding, LA Times. And I finally decided, okay, I'm going to take the TV job first because you have to be young, you have to be able to carry all this heavy equipment, and I can do that. And then when I get old and toothless and wrinkled, then I'll be a print reporter because no one's going to see me if I'm a print reporter.
Well, that's kind of a burn on print reporters, but I get it.
I guess so.
Well, no. Remember, this is way back when you didn't see print reporters. I mean, now you see them all the time
Right.
on their, on their
Yeah.
websites. So that was my logic, and that's how I became a television journalist.
So what was
Wow.
it like covering the news in Redding, California?
It was like boot camp because I had to take my own film, my own silent 16 millimeter film. I had to edit my own film and videotape. We had one tiny little video camera, and all the other reporters would fight over who would get to use it. And I always lost because I was the new hire. But from that very first position, I was a reporter, a photographer, a producer, and anchor because I had anchored the 11 o'clock newscast. So it was like boot camp.
How long did you stay in Redding?
Just a year, but it was a really powerful, year because I learned a lot. Also met my future husband, Larry Blackstock.
Yeah.
He was director there. Then went up to KPTV in Portland, Oregon. It was an independent station and it was still using film in 1979. And I would look across the street to all the other affiliates in Portland. They had videotape cameras, they had live vans that they could go, live microwave vans. And I said, that's what I want. I want to work with microwave vans. And so I was only in Portland for maybe 10, 11 months anchoring their show. And I went to Como. I got hired at Como in Seattle.
Wow.
And that's where I got the big time anchor job. Tony Ventrella and I were co-anchors of their first morning newscast, Wake Up.
Wake Up.
Como.
What time did you have to wake up to do Wake Up?
It's amazing. The Wake Up program was at 6 a.m. That was the earliest newscast then at the time. So, I just woke up at 3 in the morning.
Just 3.
Just 3.
3 a.m.
Yeah. So
were there any other Asian anchors on the air at that time?
All the Asian anchors at the time were either on the mornings, like myself, or on the weekends, like James Hattori and James Hattori and Hattie Kaufman, who was not an Asian American, she was indigenous, but they had the people of color anchoring on the weekends and odd hours, but there was no person of color anchoring weeknights, the big shows, 5, 6:30, and 11.
So what was it like then? How did you end up in the big chair eventually? I mean, how long did it take you from the time you hit Seattle to hitting the big chair?
Okay. So I arrived at Como in 80, went to King in 83, and I was hired to do the 11 p.m. or selected to do the 11 p.m. in 1998. So how many is that? 18 years, 17 years.
Wow.
I was working as I was anchoring mornings, I was anchoring weekends, I was reporting. I was anchoring the 6:30 show called Top Story for 5 years, but that show had 5 different anchors. So I don't consider that, your show. You're not the primary anchor there. So maybe 17 years of working at King before I was actually selected the 11 p.m. anchor to replace Gene Anderson, who was stepping back from that newscast to focus on the 5 and 6:30. And I mean, this is the position, right? Because it's the big time when they put a press release out. And say, Lori has been selected the 11 p.m. anchor, right?
But it wasn't that easy of a gig to get, right? I mean, there was some intrigue.
I mean, I had to audition with Dennis Bounds at a station that I had been working at for 17 years. They said, yep, get on the set and we need an audition with you and Dennis to see how you do, to see how the chemistry is going. It's not like they hadn't seen me anchoring for all those weekends and mornings before, but I had to go through the process. They were committed to doing a nationwide search. Right?
But there was also some other stuff going on here as well before you got that post, because Margaret Larson had also come over from Cairo, and she was an anchor, wasn't she, at one point before you got that? Or how did that work?
So it was like I got the 11 o'clock position in 98, and I was doing that position for about a little more than a year. And all of a sudden, I was called into the news director's office, and he said, I'm going to be talking to the newsroom in about 10 minutes, but I just wanted to let you know, I've hired Margaret Larson to do the 11 o'clock newscast. And you just do the 10 o'clock on Kong. And we're going to expand your work on Kong too. We're going to add the 7 p.m. on Kong. So all of a sudden I became I went from 11 p.m. anchor on King with very large ratings to anchoring the 10 o'clock on Kong with a rating of 2.0 and a yet to be launched 7 p.m. newscast in a few seconds.
So you were demoted, basically, right?
They said it was not a demotion.
Of course, because
they said it was to put me on Kong because they needed to build an audience with a familiar face. But it sure felt like a demotion, because all of a sudden I went from 11 o'clock anchor to 10 o'clock on Kong. And then immediately, like a few minutes later, the news director marched out into the newsroom and announced it to everybody else. Stony silence. People were like shocked to hear this. I was shocked. But what can you do when the news director says, I've hired so-and-so? Well, they've hired so-and-so. So what I thought as advancing people of color in the anchor chair was really suddenly not there anymore.
Well, and then you said that when you got that 11 o'clock chair, it was the first time we had an Asian in the market, right? And so there was some discussion, like in all markets, that, okay, we've got our quota now.
Well, it's the first Asian American on the week, on a daily weeknight newscast. The big, one of the big three at the time. And the saying back then, and even before the 90s, into when I got there, and you could ask any person of color, journalist of color, stations in general figured they just had to have one or maybe at most two people of color in their newsroom, and then they were satisfying all of the FCC rules. And it would be great if you could hire a woman of color, because then you get credit for a twofer.
Yeah, twofer. That was
right?
So brutal.
A woman as well as a person of color. Wow. We get credit for both with one hire.
But you still had to be able to perform. You still had to be able to do the job.
Absolutely. In fact, you probably had to do you had to be twice as good to get the position, because, people were not used to hiring with diversity in mind back then. Yeah. It was hard to get, a job if you're a person of color at the anchor level. Now, to King's credit, we did have, Enrique, you were there, and we had Mimi Gann, and we had Susan Hahn, and we had Linda Tyra, James Satori, right? Hattie Kaufman. We had Linda Kennedy, we had people of color working there, but not sitting in the anchor chair next to, the rest of the Caucasians up there.
We had the worker bees. Yes, that. You said, okay, what do I do when after this news director then announced all of this? Well, the option would be to leave. Did you have that opportunity, or did you even think about
it? I considered myself in quite a bind. I didn't feel like I could leave or go to the station across the street. Well, first of all, because Margaret came from Cairo, right, across the street. I couldn't apply at Cairo. I'd already worked at Como, and I didn't know that I wanted to work at Channel 13. So, because even at that time, our 10 o'clock on Kong was beating out Channel 13. So I didn't have many local options to move. I could have tried to move to a network position, but that would have meant leaving town. And I didn't want to do that because I had a young son, was loving his school, loving his friends. Larry had a great position, a management position. And I just felt like, no, I really can't go. So I just kind of held my tongue, because there was this huge, unbeknownst to me, there was this huge reaction from the community. People from, the Chinatown ID, people from Japanese American Citizens League, churches, people who weren't even Asian. I mean, other groups, Latinos, African American groups were up in arms. Viewers in general were up in arms. They were mystified because they'd say, wait a minute, you put out this press release and now you're saying she's no longer there. So there was quite a hubbub. And so I just kind of lay low because I didn't think I had that many options.
Yeah. Didn't you have an offer though from NBC at one point?
At one point I did. It was earlier. It was like in the early 90s. I really thought hard about it, but again, it would require living in Burbank or reporting to work in LA, and I couldn't see moving the family to LA.
Yeah.
And when I thought about it, the only reason why I wanted to work at the network was I wanted to be able to say, Lori Matsukawa, NBC News, Tokyo, or NBC News, Egypt, Cairo, Egypt, or whatever. And amazingly enough, in the years after I turned down this correspondent job, King started sending me to wonderful places. I ended up covering the Iowa caucuses and New Hampshire primaries. I went to Nicaragua for an earthquake. I went to Japan to cover Apple exports. I was able to say Lori Matsukawa, King 5 News, Tokyo. Lori Matsukawa, King 5 News, Nicaragua. It was almost like I was a network correspondent without having to be a network correspondent.
You had to do the Olympics. Didn't you go to the Olympics as well?
Yep.
Yeah.
Went to the Olympics in 2002 and 2010. So it was, and I went to Mariners, ALCS, games. I was able to travel and report as if I were a correspondent without being a network correspondent. It was amazing.
Well,
I felt it was a lucky, it worked out for me.
Yeah. But you got those opportunities because you were good. You were a good reporter. You were solid. You were someone that could handle the job. But do you think you also got those opportunities because they didn't want you to go because they didn't give you the anchor chair ahead of time, when you wanted it?
As it turned out, not long after this whole demotion thing, it was contract negotiation time, and I was able to renegotiate a pretty good contract. I think management was concerned about the optics. They thought it didn't really look good now that we think about it, and they felt that we'll want you to stay. So they paid me a little more. They allowed me to go to our son's orchestra concerts, have time off for that, increase my vacation. So I think there was a benefit to staying, keeping quiet, and, renegotiating it for the better for myself.
You and I we did a little work together from 1984 to 1993. You co-hosted a show with me called Celebrate the Differences.
Mm-hmm.
And Matt and I talked about this in our preview because those so-called minority affair shows gave me an opportunity to kind of make my name. And at times I remember feeling like, okay, don't get any resources, don't get a lot of help here, but if this is my opportunity, I'll take advantage of it. And I have tremendous respect for you because I came up and asked you not long after you had started Top Story if you would be the co-host with me. And I remember having to really negotiate with the producer at the time and all of that. But you said yes, and you did it. You just did it. You were always there. You were a great co-host. You were a great friend. And during that time, though, I'd like to think that we set a bit of a standard in covering issues of people of color and trying to bring something to the community. But I know that that's meant a lot to you as well. And it meant a lot to me that you were willing to do it.
It was definitely something you and I had to do. We had to be out there. We had to be on TV to encourage more people of color to show up, to think about becoming part of the news and journalism and storytelling industry. Part of the lack of applicants for our jobs is that they didn't see people that look like them on TV. So students and young people wouldn't even think about applying for a TV job. We had to change that. So Celebrate the Differences did that. And being on the news set, did that every night, just showing up every night. I think made a difference. I remember in the early days, news directors would say, "Okay, we've got enough people of color up there. We can stop
God.
hiring."
Yeah.
But we had to change that mentality. And so I remember going up to news directors saying, "Hey, we need to hire more journalists of color, especially Asian American men. Not too many Asian American men on TV." And they would say, "Well, we would hire them, but where are they? We can't seem
Yeah,
to
boy, I
find
heard
these
that a lot.
candidates."
Yeah.
Right? So
Where
I
can
said,
I find
"Okay."
them?
Right. So I said, "Okay, fine. We'll set up a pipeline. We're going to identify these young aspiring journalists of color. We're going to send them to college and give them scholarships, send them to college, and we're going to put them in that pipeline so that you can hire them." And at that time in 1983, or is it eight? No, 1983, three of us, Ron Chu, Frank Abe, who was at Cairo Radio at the time, and myself, we formed a local chapter of the Asian American Journalists Association. We wanted to be like the Black journalists, and we wanted to be like the Hispanic journalists who had their own kind of like journalism professional group.
Yeah,
And through
associations.
this chapter, right, and through this chapter, we were able to give out scholarships, encourage and mentor young people, make that pipeline so that when the news director says, "Where are these people?" we could point to the pipeline and say, "There they are. Hire them."
Yeah.
And whoa, they started hiring Asian American journalists. They would go to our national convention. They would go to our job fair. They would interview these candidates. They would hire them. And it became a phenomenon. Nowadays, you look on TV, you see a lot of Asian American journalists on TV, mostly women, but we're working hard to get more men on TV too. And how that came about was creating these associations and, making that pipeline available.
Right.
Yeah. One of the things, I mean, that work is so great. I mean, because it's about representation. In our preview podcast, we talked a lot about code switching, and we got a lot of input from women that said, look, it's not just people of color, but it's women. I wanted to ask you about code switching in your career, and that's like the process of having to filter yourself talking to white people and white management because they don't get certain things. And I'm just wondering, did you experience that? Because a lot of women wrote in that, hey, they had this whole experience also.
There was a little intro to code switching in my life, being from Hawaii originally, where a lot of people speak this kind of pidgin with a certain dialect and kind of an accent. We had to do a little code switching when I went to school on the mainland. So I didn't talk like I was from Hawaii, or I tried not to, because I didn't want people to, think I was stupid or slow because she spoke funny. So I was already at that time code switching between speaking pidgin and speaking regular English. And then when I came into the working world, a lot of it was, trying to be professional and neutral and approaching each news story and assignment in a neutral way, because I didn't want to be pigeonholed as, oh, the minority reporter. Of course, she's pitching that story. It's a minority story.
Yeah.
And then one year, and I can't remember what year it was, I finally said to myself, you know what? I don't care if I'm pigeonholed as the minority journalist, because I am a minority reporter here. There are so many stories that I've done and plan to do to give a voice to communities of color. Black community, Latino community, indigenous community, Asian. I wanted to be that reporter. These are stories that no one else in the newsroom was doing, so I might as well do it.
Yeah.
And so there was a switch in my mentality. I think it came in the early 90s, maybe mid 90s, when I said, that's it. I don't care about being pigeonholed as the minority reporter, because that's what I am. And it's important that I do it. I'm so glad I did it. Part of it was influenced by the redress movement that was happening in Seattle. Redress for Japanese Americans whose families were incarcerated during World War II in camps, internment camps. And this was a movement that was born in Seattle, supported in Seattle, and nobody was reporting on it. So I said, darn it, I'm going to start going to these hearings, and I'm going to start talking to these survivors, and I'm going to start talking to their families, and I'm going to start talking to the congressmen who are sponsoring bills. Mike Lowry from the state of Washington was the very first congressman to introduce a redress bill. And so I began documenting this history, talking to people, and it kind of became a focus throughout my career. But it was important that I do that. It was also important for me to go into the community and talk about Juneteenth. You know, when Charlize was first starting the Juneteenth celebration, I went in there and said, what is this Juneteenth? Tell me about it. And so it was just a wonderful experience. And a lot of it was kind of an outgrowth of Celebrate the Differences. And it was a lot of outgrowth from being an Olympia reporter, where I interacted with Ron Sims, who at that time was working in politics, and, you know, and Gary Locke was coming up, and Norm Rice was coming up. There was this movement of people of color moving on up in Seattle. And the Gang of Four, I don't know if Enrique, you talked about the Gang of Four.
Yeah, they're good
but
friends
the
of mine.
communities, right? The communities were raising this awareness. So it was a great time, actually, to be the minorities reporter.
You know, the Gang of Four had a lot to do with why Celebrate the Differences became Celebrate the Differences and had a 9-year run, because they actually came to King and had a meeting with, and I was part of that meeting with the then program director and a program manager, and I think they scared the hell out of them. I know they did, actually. And actually, but it was that community thing where they said, hey, you know, we're going to take a stand here. But, you know, these are American stories that we were telling. And I think that that's the most important thing to note, because it's not like they're, you know, stories from in Mexico or the Philippines. I mean, they don't have roots there, but they're American stories because people came here to live. And, you know, the other thing that I always have a bit of an issue with now is that I try to get away from saying minority, because to be honest with you, we're going to be the majority, or we're there, but
We're there.
but we're people of color, and we're Americans. We're Americans in telling these stories. So, you know, that's what I always appreciated about you, is that you were, you know, you did it. And I think for young people to know your story and your history is just so important, because there's going to be they need to know the people that were the trailblazers ahead of time. So that's great that you're doing that. So tell us more about the memoir. What are you hoping to kind of accomplish, and hoping that you'll be able to do with it?
I'm writing it certainly not because I want to be famous, quote unquote. I want it to be kind of a document for the future generations, so that they know our history, know what happened to people they know, and can appreciate a bit of the struggle. Okay, it didn't come easy. It takes vigilance still to not regress, to not become, you know, invisible anymore. We work so hard to be visible. The young people have to know that, embrace that, and move forward, and be strong, and keep the movement growing. You know, like you said, we're not going to be the minority. We will soon be the majority. And I don't even like this us, them, minority, majority thing. We are the United States of America.
I agree.
And that was the thing about being Miss Teenage America that made me so proud, was that you could be Miss Teenage America and look like me.
Yeah.
And that's America. America, you know, has a multitude of faces and a multitude of cultures, and it's what makes the country strong. It really does. And it needs its storytellers like you. It needs storytellers like you, Matt. It needs a lot of people up there, visible, speaking, storytelling, you know, supporting one another. The communities, they supported us, you and me,
Yeah.
And, they came out for Celebrate the Differences. They came out and wrote letters and made calls when I lost the 11. Just to put a little end to that 11 o'clock story, after 2 years, Margaret took another job with a nonprofit group. And they said, Lori, you fill in for Margaret at 11 while we conduct a nationwide search. And I continued anchoring the 11 for the next 23 years.
Nice,
nice.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's the story.
Yeah. So I do have one question, Lori, about are you still able to drop into the pigeon and just put it down?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Give us a little bit.
No. That would be, no. That would be too much. I think I would embarrass myself.
Oh, we won't post it or anything like that. Right. Come on.
But
Lori.
again, it's like, you mentioned the Gang of Four. And for those who don't know, the Gang of Four were the 4 leaders of the different communities: Bernie White Bear for the indigenous people, Roberto Maestas for the Latinos, Bob Santos for the Asian Americans, and, our dear friend Larry Gossett Jr. for the African Americans. And these 4 worked together, brought communities together. And I'm sure that's what led up to the hiring of more journalists of color, that led up to the more election of politicians of color. That's why we get a Mayor Norm Rice and a Governor Gary Luck and, a King County Executive Ron Sims. That's how these things happen. And I'm so excited about the young people learning this, remembering it, and then moving it forward.
Right. Take a good look at our state Supreme Court now with Chief
Yes.
Justice Steve Gonzalez, and now a Native American who is a justice, as well as an African American woman that is a justice.
And Mary Yu,
Mary
an
Yu.
Asian American
Yeah.
lesbian.
Yeah.
I'm like, yes.
Yeah. Charles E. Smith would be very proud. He was the Chief Justice for a long time, and he really set the bar and the standard there. And it's great to see all of that. So, thank you.
Wait, quick story about Charles E. Smith.
Yeah.
One last story about Charles E. Smith.
Sure.
His wife, Ellie Martinez, was a classmate of my mother's.
Oh my God.
In Hawaii.
Wow.
High school classmates. No, college classmates. And to this day, I write letters to Ellie Martinez, and she writes back. She's
great.
88, 89 years old. I love that woman. But that's the tie, the Hawaii, Washington State tie. I love it.
So when do you hope to have your memoir done? How far along?
Oh, soon.
Really?
It's driving me crazy. I feel this sense of urgency to finish it, because you never know how much time one has.
Yeah.
So I want to finish it soon, get it out there, and as much of a history as an encouragement. I want it to be a history as well as a piece of encouragement. That's it.
Well, when you get it done, please come back, and then we'll go through each page with you and make sure that and then we'll also try to convince you to do the pigeon for us. Okay. Yeah. We want to hear that. Lori Matsukawa, thank you so much. Thank you for everything you do. Have a great year, and good luck with your continuation of your activities in the community and writing of that book, and come back and talk to us about it. All right, Lori? Thank you so much.
Thanks, Enrique. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Lori.